Thank you, Christian, for allowing me to share this session at this great event. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining. 9 months ago, we were in lockdown, and we were facing a challenge like no other. Enabling remote workers meant saving jobs and enabling kids to go to school online. Our only remote access was for admins. The infrastructure was nowhere close to being ready for users. We were starting from zero. Most of you were probably familiar with research that suggests that fixed routines give kids a sense of security. Suddenly, schools were in lockdown, and many students and families had to struggle to adjust. Virtual school was essential to reestablishing routines and easing the emotional effects of lockdowns for families. But before I continue this story, a little bit about me. My name is Jen Sheerin. I've been working in end-user computing for over 10 years, primarily focused on Citrix and in recent years, cloud solutions in both Citrix Cloud and Microsoft Azure. You can see some of my community involvements listed. I was awarded this year MVP in the Enterprise Mobility category for RDS, and in my second year as a Citrix Technology Advocate. I am the founder and leader of the USA WVD User Group, and I'm one of the local leaders for the Citrix User Group community in the Tampa Bay area. I'm a mentor in Citrix User Group Community Women in Technology, and I currently work for Presidio as a senior engineer doing delivery of both WVD and Citrix solutions. Back to the story. We needed to build an environment that would support a large number of users remotely. It needed to be done in a short period of time. The resources had to be readily available. It seemed like a tall order. Going out and buying network appliances, servers, and other infrastructure components to build out would take time. Not to mention the connectivity link between the various locations would need to be increased. We needed a solution that could be provisioned in hours or days, not weeks or months. The user experience was key. The solution had to ensure a familiar interface that would not require much training. Training in person was not an option, and time would not permit for training webinars. The interconnectivity between the various locations back to the primary location had limited bandwidth. Latency would impact performance for the satellite office users. There were 1,800 locations to upgrade. The solution had to be highly available and highly scalable to ensure the remote work transition by creating an experience that was similar to the office experience. To meet the challenges, a decision was made to provide the users with a virtual desktop experience that is familiar to their current office computers with Windows 10. Using Microsoft Azure, we would be able to quickly build out the infrastructure for a fraction of the cost compared to a physical solution, connect and express route connectivity to access on-premises resources with Windows Virtual Desktop to meet the goals. The environment took advantage of network best practices using the hub and spoke model, and the initial solution would be built to support 30,000 users and accomplished in 3 weeks. To achieve this enormous task, partnership and collaboration were necessary to meet the timelines. I was brought in to lead the WVD efforts, and as you can imagine, there were some vital lessons learned on this project. This project was on the classic version of WVD. However, the tips I will share with you are relevant to the current version. With no time to waste, the first meeting of the group, we dove right into task at hand and quickly realized that separate teams will be needed to meet deadlines. Communication was a vital component of this project. Alongside with the WVD build, there was other work efforts like building Active Directory domain controllers in Azure, and another work effort in motion was to migrate to OneDrive. This was important to me. Not all the users had profiles in a central location or roaming. Ensuring the user experience was going to require roaming profiles. We were starting with an empty subscription. The hub already had the 2 domain controllers being built with a site-to-site VPN connection, but that was going to be upgraded to an express route as soon as the provider could give a date and time. This network change would cause a work stoppage, and the team understood that we needed to communicate that schedule, keeping in mind time to delivery was critical. What you see here is a representation of a large-scale hybrid architecture like the one in my project. Notice the network best practices of hub and spoke design. The express route allows for connection to the on-premises location. WVD has its own subscription designed for scalability. Another important check was IP address allocation to make sure there was enough room to grow. The decision was made to start with 200 VMs for the first phase of the rollout. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? I need to check the core counts. If you're not too familiar with Azure, let me explain. The vCPU quotas are set for each subscription with the total regional vCPUs. What does that mean? All cloud vendors set limits. After all, there is a finite number of servers in a facility in a region. Some of the limits are hard, meaning they cannot be changed, and some are soft, meaning you can request an increase. Building out a large environment demands a check of the subscription core counts. Not all subscriptions have the same limits, and regions matter as well. The easiest way to check is to query your subscription. I can do this in PowerShell. I took the liberty of typing out my commands so you don't have to watch me type. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to connect to my Azure subscription so I can communicate with Azure. When I run the connect-az account, I get a pop-up box to log in. Here, I'll go ahead and enter my credentials. My username first, and once I click Next, I'll be prompted for my password to sign in. So now that I've established my connection, I need to select my subscription. So in my case, I have a couple of subscriptions, and the first one that popped up here is my Visual Studio subscription. Let's go ahead and run the command to find out my VM quotas on this subscription so we can see how it differs from my other subscription. So I run the get-azvm usage command, and I get a long list of limits here. So if we take a look at the top of the list, you can see here that I have total regional vCPUs, and it's at 20 cores. So that's not going to give me a whole lot of options. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at my other subscription to compare. First, I need to run the get AZ subscription command, which allows me to choose my other subscription. And when I run the get AZ VM usage command, you will see that I have a little bit more, 350 to be exact. And that is the number that we want to look at for building out. If we know that we're going to build a huge amount of VMs, then this is not going to work. And so immediately we need to go through and request an increase. You can also check the limits in the Azure portal. I can look up the same information if I look at my subscriptions. I select my subscription and I go down to usage and quotas under settings in the blade. Since I don't have any usage currently, I will change the setting to show all. Next, I will select my region and then select the Microsoft Compute provider. I have to scroll down to find the total regional vCPUs. And here you will see that it's very similar to what we saw in PowerShell. There it is, the 20. If I go ahead and I switch to my other subscription, and I'll do the same thing. I'll go down to usage and quotas under settings, and I'll select compute and my region, and you will see that I have 350. Notice this button at the top right? I can select this button to request an increase, and it will take me to the support request page so I can go ahead and request more hours. This is what we did, knowing that we would have to increase our core count based on the numbers we were building. As an example, if you're spinning up 200 D4S V3 VMs to start with, I would need 800 vCPUs. If we didn't increase the quotas, we would get errors during the deployment. Speaking of errors during the deployment, we were all feeling confident in our progress. The applications were installed on the base image from the marketplace image with O365 at the time. Knowing once you sysprep, that was it for the image, we took a snapshot before sysprepping to make sure we had a custom image starting point. This way, you could create a new VM from the snapshot and have all the apps installed. Did I mention that we were not using any third-party tools for image management? Let's assume that I've already set up WVD, created the tenant, granted the consent for the WVD service, and assigned the roles. Now that we have the image captured, it was time to create a host pool. It started off good, and as we waited, we discussed taking a break because by now we had been working nonstop and could all use a much-needed recharge. I grabbed a coffee thinking I would get back to see the deployment still running. No such luck. There was an error. By now, the rest of the team was back, and we were able to look at the error message details. Domain join failure was the root. This was part of the prep work. A request was fulfilled to create the service account that can join VMs to the domain. The account must not use MFA and requires a complex password of at least 12 characters. Well, it turns out the delegated control for the OU was missed. So we set that up, and now we had to start over. But before, we have to go through and remove what was deployed before the error. And I would like to tell you it was smooth sailing from here, but it happened again, which was DNS. Each time the deployment failed, we had to clean up the items deployed manually. This meant deleting VMs, NICs, disk, etc. from the resource group. The mistake I made was to use the same resource group to keep all of WVD together. I also had the snapshot and captured image file in the same resource group. Do you remember the starting deployment was 200 VMs? Imagine having a failure and sifting through about 100 items to delete individually. Not fun. From then on, we created a unique resource group for each host pool. Here I learned a valuable lesson on naming, and that it's worth to take the time to plan. The Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure gives a good foundation for the assets. However, at the time, it did not include Windows Virtual Desktop. There's a template that you can download to help you keep track of your naming decisions. So in addition to the naming of the resource group, we took it a step further to make things easier. This is the general rule that came out of the experience. Common names throughout OU, GPO, resource group, host pool, and VMs. Here is a sample of what an OU structure may look like. Note that the OU names below the WVD. This was decided from the planning stage and agreed upon that fits with the current standards. The OU names carry through when naming the group policy objects. The GPO reference the file share to store FSLogic's profile with the same name. In Azure, my resource groups have the same name, and the host pool and session host VMs NetBIOS names as well. Naming is consistent throughout all the assets, making it easy to understand which are related to each other. This method proved to be very helpful not only in a large-scale environment, but also in smaller solutions. Now that we had our naming set and resources deployed, the validation began. The first logon, we all eagerly looked on as the desktop loaded. We were reassured to see the FSLogic service processing message. Speaking of FSLogic, given the size of the environment and the requirements for logging, we needed to be mindful of the storage space for logging. As an example, 10,000 users with 20 gigabytes of logs a day retained for 2 days adds up as you scale up. We took advantage of the FSLogic setting to redirect the log files to the NetApp share created for logs to ensure this would not be a problem in the future. And speaking of FSLogic settings, these are some of the settings that were set in GPO so they could be centrally managed. To delete local profile when VHD should apply removes any local profiles that may exist to avoid issues. Given the fact that users were dispersed in various locations and the profile size was going to be an unknown, the default value of 30 gigs was left in place. It is safer to have a bigger number than run the risk of running out of space and getting errors. The volume type was set to VHDX, and I haven't seen a case to set it differently yet. The choice of VHDX allows for more options for maintenance, like shrink profile size, etc. The flip-flop profile directory name makes it easy to search for the specific profile user folder on the network share, where the username is listed first, and this is especially valuable in a large environment. I made sure to send over the list of FSLogic's exclusions for antivirus to the security team ahead of time. This list is the recommended best practice to ensure there are no performance issues, contention, or locking of files unnecessarily. Now that the desktop loaded, we started validation. First up was ensuring the profiles were active on FSLogix. I like to validate the profile status with the use of the FRX tool. It is found in the program folders, and once you launch, it will be listed with the tray icons. A right-click open will bring up the status, and here you can see I'm going to clean up some of these windows so we can see this a little bit better. You can see the green light showing active. If there was a problem and not active, you can drill down into the logs to get clues on the root cause of the issue. We didn't have any issues, but the team liked having the tool to troubleshoot so much that it was requested to add it in the startup on the next image update. I think everyone was just so used to roaming profiles in the help desk calls that having the tool available for troubleshooting made sense for this environment. I like to do a little bit more checks for profiles. So I'll navigate to see users folder, and here you can see both the username folder and the local underscore username folder indicating FSLogix is in use. One more verification about profiles. Back in the Azure portal, I'll go over to my storage account and I browse over to the file shares. And here I can see my WVD profile share. And if I open up the share, I can see the profile folders. Notice you see two folders, username underscore SID and SID underscore username. I wanted to show you this to simulate when we were doing the deployment. I forgot to enable the flip-flop profile directory name setting, and I had to go back and add it after the first logon. After the change, a new profile is created. This is something you want to keep in mind if you make the change after going live. Luckily, I caught it before more than one person had logged in, and it was easy to just delete the old profile. One more thing we noticed that the WVD system time was not correct. It was in UTC time zone, but we had the setting in the GPO. Running gpresults/r with an elevated command prompt showed that the policy did not get applied. A review of the GPO on the domain showed the setting. was done hours ago, so it should have replicated to all the other domain controllers by now. Well, remember I told you earlier that 2 domain controllers were being added in Azure? It turns out there was a problem with one of the domain controllers, and it was not replicating. After talking to the AD team, we decided that they would shut down the server for now so we could continue working. Continuing with the validation, we checked to make sure that the VM was utilizing a license. Running get-azvm with the resource group name and the name of the VM command in PowerShell, I can see in the output the license type equals Windows_client. So far, good. We moved on, logging on to Teams. During the installation, we had made sure to use the machine-wide installation commands and set the registry key for is_wvd environment for Teams. Login was a success, and next we made a test audio call with Teams to check the microphone and speakers were being used. We all celebrated the victory, and the mood of the team was lifted with the success. Keep in mind, everyone was working from home with kids next to them doing schoolwork, and we were all in lockdown. Celebrating wins was a good thing. As we launched Outlook to test things, the mood changed quickly. We expected the sign-in, but not the fail activation. By now, the team had been working long hours. With little breaks, our hearts sank. Logging on to Word and Excel showed the same. On the file account shows the user signed in, but the subscription was not active. This was a showstopper. We could not add users until the Office activation was resolved. Not wasting any time, we got the ball rolling on getting a Microsoft case created to get the right folks involved in getting the issue resolved. Meanwhile, not shy about admitting that Office was not my specialty, I called on some Office experts from my network. We ran through some of the known troubleshooting checks. We verified that shared computer activation was enabled for M365 apps, known then as Office 365. We even made sure the test user had an O365 license assigned. Right at this time, a few of the best support folks at Microsoft joined the team and started log enabling to troubleshoot the issue further. We were still racing the clock, and there was much more to be done. So leaving the work team was the best use of my team's time. So we created another Teams channel and resumed work on validation. OneDrive was next on the list. Earlier, we had set up OneDrive settings in GPO and the known folders to redirect to OneDrive, also in GPO. Lucky for me, I remember seeing a brilliant blog by my fellow MVP Robin Hobo about how to start OneDrive and automatically sign in when using a remote app in WVD. The solution was perfectly described for setting up the silent account config and files on demand, as you can see on the screen, and what Robin called the magic key to make it work on the first logon. This was indeed a gift, and I would like to thank Robin for sharing with the community. It is truly a testament to the importance of sharing and community. We had the GPOs in place and expected a successful test. Login was successful and no prompt first logon, but the configuration didn't work. As I did my mental checks out loud, one of the team members stopped me. During the installation of a line of business software on the master image, he had logged on to OneDrive to grab software. This was before we syswrapped the image, and now the behavior we saw made sense. According to the documentation, the silent account config creates a silent business config completed registry entry once the silent account config was successfully provisioned to user in OneDrive. This key prevents reprovisioning of the user in OneDrive. If silent account config has successfully been completed on the master image, you need to delete the registry key before syswrapping the image. You can do so by running the command you see on the screen. We had a running list of changes to the master image, and it was clear we would need the next version before adding UAT users. A new VM was spun up from the snapshot taken before the syswrap. Remember, at this time, we were in the classic version and limited to image management choices. The Office activation issue was still being worked on, and Antivirus was on the suspects list. So the team asked to remove the Antivirus software from the master image temporarily to test. While this seemed to be a simple task, it was more difficult due to the process. The one person responsible for enterprise antivirus needed to provide a key to do the uninstall. He was not reachable, and had we not been in lockdown, I would have expected a search party would have been sent out. In all fairness, it was well into the night by now, and the guy was probably fast asleep. We worked on other items on the list in the meantime. Seems like I've been saying that a lot, and hopefully it shows how the time to deliver was impacting the way we worked. Work efforts occurred in parallel, and all teams met in the morning and at the end of the day, unless something significant needed an impromptu meeting. The twice daily meetings proved valuable with so many teams in different work paths. We needed to communicate. The plan for the day was always at the top of the agenda for the morning meetings, and the success or accomplishments were discussed at the end of the day meetings. This method worked in a time where there were so many unknowns facing the world. And it was important to remember that we are all humans. Emotions were far from average, and we worked tirelessly because we all knew the work we were doing had a purpose of impacting many lives. Celebrating wins were essential. So at this point, we had made the changes of the master image, including uninstalling the antivirus program, deployed new VMs with the new image, and the Office activation issue remained unchanged. The Office team continued troubleshooting and eventually resolved the issue. The firewall was blocking WVD VMs from reaching the Office URLs. After whitelisting the list of URLs like the example seen here, the problem was solved. We learned that day to ask about the firewall configuration from the start. When adopting a new technology, it is crucial to understand how it's working in your environment, and WVD is no different. At the time, we used Sapago's log analytics with Custo queries to get metrics data. Today, we have integration with ARM, and Christian made it easy to set up with a great blog post with all the details of setting up log analytics workbook. You can get details on sessions, active number of users, host pool performance, and much more. This data was key for us to understand how many users were logging on and figuring out performance. Here is what a current day sample workbook looks like. We accomplished our goals. It was not easy. If you're wondering why it took so long, you should know that the entire project was done via Teams with no access to the environment due to security restrictions and no remote control. I had eyes only and was dependent on others to perform the tasks with my guidance. This too was a lesson for me to work in a different way and grow my communication skills to explain tasks clearly. When UAT was opened up, it was like the floodgates. The UAT users were so happy with the results. They shared it with coworkers, and word got out on how to access the system, and before you know it, we were doing UAT with 2,000 concurrent users. I guess the saying, if you build it, they will come, is real. My advice for anyone embarking on a new project is to make sure you have completed all your build before UAT. Of course, it was not perfect, and there were tweaks. Add a desktop shortcut or a link for the users, and some other tweaks. We found out that the users had a workflow to export a file from one of the line of business applications, modify the file in Excel, and then import it back into the application. With more conversation in the design process, we would have known about this requirement. It highlights how critical the design process and interviewing the users to understand the objectives before starting a project. This was one thing I wish I had known before starting, because I would not have set that app as being a published application. The users were able to use the same workflow they were familiar with on the published WVD desktop, so in the end, it all worked out. If I had to do the project all over again, I would like to spend more time in the design process phase. It is an important step that leads to success. I shared with you a lot, so let's recap some of the key takeaways. Spend some time talking to the key stakeholders to do discovery and planning. Right at the start, you want to check your network, IP allocations, and limits. Request increases as needed. What type of architecture are you building? Are you following the best practices when creating landing zones? Do you understand the security policies and firewall rules in place or required? These are all questions that need answering at the start of the project. I showed you the importance of naming and my rule for consistent naming throughout all the assets. This proves valuable when working in a large-scale environment, but I think it can apply to smaller environments as well. We talked about being mindful of the FSLogix log sizes and redirecting them to another location. Antivirus exclusions for FSLogix, and using GPOs to manage policies centrally. Remember that if you do log on to OneDrive on the master image before sysprep, you will need to remove the silent business config completed reg key. Suppose you are not using an image management solution. I would recommend snapshotting the image before sysprep. We talked about understanding the environment and how we can use log analytics to help. And test. I shared with you some of my validation steps for FSLogix using the FRX tray tool, checking the C users folders, and browsing the profile share to validate the profile was created. And make sure to use the flip-flop directory setting so that your username is listed first. Communication was the key to the success of this project. One example was when GPOs failed to apply. We talked to the AD team to quickly find out one of the domain controllers had issues. We learned how to coordinate priorities so that work could continue not to impact the goals. Considering a group of people from various companies came together to accomplish this goal shows the power of communication and the human spirit. The purpose was too great, and the outcome magnificent. This project is one I will not forget. It has been my honor to present at this great community event today. Thank you.